It just wouldn't be Borderlands 3 without one last controversy to squeak out before the game launches. The game is due out in a few days, and a few days ago, the first reviews dropped, but only at a select handful of outlets because of what 2K Games calls security concerns. Usually, when one hears of security reasons for not being given a review code, it's bollocks. The only security they're concerned about is the security of the game's Metacritic score, but Borderlands 3's situation is a little bit unique, a little bit weird, and it involves the Epic Store, so you get to be mad about Borderlands 3, which people really enjoy doing, and you get to be mad about the Epic Game Store again if you want, which people really love doing as well. Today's video is a twofer. To be serious though, this isn't really worth getting mad about. This is more interesting and weird and a bit silly. Though the story does call into question the validity and the use of these very early handful of reviews. Not for ethical reasons, but more mechanical reasons. Now, you may have heard of this story, it's been floating about, there's been a little bit of a buzz about it. Kotaku posted an article discussing how strange this scenario is, but let's talk about what happened. So, only a meager handful of outlets got review copies for Borderlands 3. And not all of the reviews mention the state that this particular copy of the game was in. Most review copies are just the retail versions of the game, except you get an early unlock code or an early copy of the disc. As Kotaku notes, last generation it was a lot more common to get debug builds of games, which would be on special debug consoles. I never liked basing reviews off those, I always wanted retail code. I didn't want some earlier, rougher version of a game, I wanted to play and see and experience the game that the people actually buying said game would get. The whole idea of debug copies for reviews fell more and more out of favour anyway as the generation wore on, and you rarely hear about it these days, but Borderlands 3 has sorta kinda resurrected the idea in a strange roundabout way. You see, rather than getting any sort of code for Borderlands 3, early reviewers instead got an Epic Game Store account that had a version of Borderlands 3 unlocked on it. And this version was reportedly shit. Rather than get anything close to a retail version of the game, these early reviewers based their reviews on basically mid-development versions, work-in-progress versions of Borderlands 3. Now, I've been in the whole game criticism business for a long time now, over 10 years, blimey, and I've never heard of this. I've never heard of this situation before. Those debug copies I used to get back in the day, now they were not the retail version, but they were pretty close. They were usually just a bit less stable than the retail versions. You know, a few of the final bugs hadn't been ironed out. That's why they're called debug copies. But what's going on with the Borderlands 3 situation is reviewers got hold of copies that were earlier in development than that. Now, 2K Games warned prospective reviewers that these versions would be pretty rough, and they were even asked not to mention certain things. Reviewers were asked to stay away from talking about the game's DirectX 12 implementation. And you know, it's never a good look when a publisher is asking a reviewer not to mention certain things. And while this situation might not necessarily be underhanded, I mean, it's highly likely 2K Games just didn't want reviewers talking about bugs that would not be in the final build, the reasoning behind that calls the value of the reviews themselves into question. I mean, if you've got a copy of a game and you don't know what bugs are going to be in the final product and what bugs aren't, and you can't really talk about any of them as a result, what's the point? I mean, seriously, what's the point? You'd be hesitant to mention bugs because you don't know what ones will be in the actual game, so the quote-unquote safest thing to do would be to not mention any of them, even though some of them may actually be in the final product. You just don't know. You literally have no idea what amount of polish will be in the version of the game people will actually play. This is precisely why I didn't like reviews based on debug builds of games, and those were a lot further along in development than this version of Borderlands appears to be. With this context that reviews really should have pointed out, with this context, a lot of these early reviews are little more than glorified previews. They can tell you everything a preview can tell you, how the game plays, what it looks like, the general atmosphere of it, but they can't tell you how stable it is, what the final quality is, what the level of polish is. I can't help but feel that's one of the reasons why debug copies of games fell out of favour with companies in the first place. Ideally, you want the reviewer to have the best experience possible with the game, experience the game at its very best. This situation seems, and I'll put this in very professional, scientific terms that comes from a veteran with over 10 years in the industry, this situation seems fucking stupid. Of course, one is left wondering, if Borderlands 3 was not an Epic Game Store exclusive, could these reviewers have just been given Steam keys like normal without any of this faffing about? I guess we'll have to see if this situation ever occurs again, but even then, normally you could at least have console codes ready by now. Now, the good old-fashioned reason for any of this is that 2K Games just didn't want a whole bunch of reviewers getting access to the game early. Kotaku notes it's getting a copy of the game, but it's only getting it one day before launch. I'm sure many other outlets will have to wait until launch day itself. VG247 notes that the only review outlets that got anything published before now were US outlets. No one in the UK games press seems to have gotten a copy at all. And it's by now an open secret that publishers don't want certain reviewers, certain critics, certain outlets getting review copies early or at the same time as other outlets. I have a whole Jimquisition episode about how certain wildcard critics are eliminated from the review code approval process by publishers who want to secure as much positive hype as possible before a game's launch. In any case, it's just another bit of weirdness, a final little bit of weirdness for Borderlands 3 before it at last comes out and is, well, let's face it, just another Borderlands game. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure it'll be fine, I'm sure it'll be more Borderlands, but nowhere near good or bad enough to justify the shitstorm that surrounded it since its announcement. Because, oh, wowie wonkers. I don't know what that is. Wowie wonkers. What a PR nightmare this game has had. The game went Epic Store exclusive and that pissed everyone off. Randy Pitchford once fundamentally misunderstood what microtransactions were and got pissed off at Game Informer when they corrected him, saying that they were trying to fuck him. He once misrepresented Troy Baker's involvement, or rather lack of involvement in the game, for reprising an old character of his, claiming Troy Baker turned the job down when Troy Baker didn't. And on the subject of voice actors, let's not forget that the original Claptrap voice actor got into a dispute with Randy Pitchford that turned very ugly on Twitter and ended up with allegations, credible, backed up allegations, of physical assault which have been levelled at the Gearbox company CEO. That's Randy Pitchford, by the way. He's the Gearbox CEO. I know that most of you watching this know that, but sometimes even I have to remind myself that he is a CEO, that he is an executive in a privileged position of power, dictating the course of a company, because he's such a fucking clown show, it defies belief. And this review situation comes very shortly after 2K Games and Take-Two Interactive very aggressively, unfairly in my opinion, unfairly pursued a YouTuber who posted some leaked information about Borderlands 3, absolutely tanking the guy's channel in the process, even as he was admitting fault and bending over backwards to please them. That's just the Borderlands 3 specific bullshit I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there's some more, and it doesn't include all of the other problems surrounding Randy Pitchford and Gearbox. And as I said a moment ago, I don't think the game's going to be remarkable enough to justify any of it. At this point, the game would have to be either incredibly amazingly good or appallingly, laughably bad. And it just looks fine. It looks like it'll be okay. It looks like it'll be absolutely just more Borderlands. And just more Borderlands doesn't deserve this lead-up we've had. It's been a hell of a ride. I think so anyway. I'm just in the peanut gallery with everyone else. I enjoy rubbernecking a good PR fuck circus like anyone. But it's almost going to be disappointing if the game comes out and it's completely inoffensive. I mean, I'm going to get it and play it for a bit and do a video on it, I'm sure. But Borderlands 3 would have to be truly remarkable to escape the shadow of its own controversies. There are certain movies, certain TV shows, certain games that will always be better known for the bullshit surrounding them than whatever they do as pieces of entertainment. And it's been such a cavalcade of nonsense with Borderlands 3, the game would have to be transcendent. And this is, by the way, a problem most Gearbox games face when they're attached to people like Randy Pitchford. He wasn't responsible for all of the bollocks with Borderlands 3, but he was responsible for some of it, and many may argue the worst of it. The YouTuber kerfuffle and this review weirdness That's one, well, I was gonna say that's one thing. Those are two things. But Randy's bluster piled on top of it, I don't know how Borderlands 3 is going down in history on its own merit. I'll tell you this straight now, and I'll say it in the Gimpressions video when I'm finally getting around to publishing, you know, my actual thoughts on the game. My view of Borderlands 3 is going to be inherently coloured. That's going to be a bias I won't be able to escape from. I'm going to be thinking about this a lot of the time I'm playing, I'm sure. 2K's nonsense, Take-Two's aggression, Randy's nonsense, which, by the way, would be a great name for a sitcom. I'd tune in and watch Randy's nonsense. I'm sure many of his antics would be hilarious if they were fiction. So anyway, that's the latest bit of weirdness from Borderlands 3. The game isn't out yet and I'm exhausted by it. I hope the game is good? Is that a sentiment even worth sharing now? I guess I mean, I'll be spending money on it. They sure as shit will never send me a review copy. I'll be spending money on it, so I certainly hope I don't waste my money on Drek. I spent $19.99 on Flowers Are Dead the other day. I'm never getting that back. But regardless, I certainly hope that when the game comes out, it can finally get out of that bed full of shit and they can change the sheets.